my life to my trade, please. Yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. I trust this should Vladimir understand.
The situation in the east of Ukraine substantially deteriorated. Russia has sent a number of armored personal vehicles, tanks and troops. We can confirm that Russian military boots are on Ukrainian ground. Ukrainian forces are capable to tackle and to cope with the Russian-led guerrillas. But this is quite difficult for us to fight with Russia and its army. We urge the EU and the United States to frozen all Russian assets until Russia pulls back its forces, its military, and stops the supply of Russian-led guerrillas.
Good afternoon, everybody. Over the last several days, the United States has been responding to events as they unfold in Ukraine. Now, throughout this crisis, we have been very clear about one fundamental principle. The Ukrainian people deserve the opportunity to determine their own future. Together with our European allies, we have urged an end to the violence and encouraged Ukrainians to pursue a course in which they stabilize their country, forge a broad-based government, and move to elections this spring. I also spoke several days ago with President Putin, and my administration has been in daily communication with Russian officials. And we've made clear that they can be part of an international community's effort to support the stability and success of a united Ukraine going forward, which is not only in the interest of the people of Ukraine and the international community, but also in Russia's interest. However, we are now deeply concerned by reports of military movements taken by the Russian Federation inside of Ukraine. Russia has a historic relationship with Ukraine, including cultural and economic ties, and a military facility in Crimea. But any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity would be deeply destabilizing, which is not in the interest of Ukraine, Russia, or Europe. It would represent a profound interference in matters that must be determined by the Ukrainian people. It would be a clear violation of Russia's commitment to respect the independence and sovereignty and borders of Ukraine and of international laws. And just days after the world came to Russia for the Olympic Games, it would invite the condemnation of nations around the world. And indeed, the United States will stand with the international community in affirming that there will be costs for any military intervention in Ukraine. The events of the past several months remind us of how difficult democracy can be in a country with deep divisions. But the Ukrainian people have also reminded us that human beings have a universal right to determine their own future. Right now, the situation remains very fluid. Vice President Biden just spoke with the Prime Minister of Ukraine to assure him that in this difficult moment, the United States supports his government's efforts and stands for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democratic future of Ukraine. I also commend the Ukrainian government's restraint and its commitment to uphold its international obligations. We will continue to coordinate closely with our European allies. We will continue to communicate directly with the Russian government, and we will continue to keep all of you in the press corps and the American people informed as events develop. Thanks very much.
Just moments before stepping on a plane Thursday, Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko had an abrupt change of plans. Addressing the nation from the runway, the president saying Russian forces had entered Ukraine. Ukrainian military officials say 2 columns of Russian tanks rolled across the southeast border from Russia, firing missiles at a border post.
We can confirm that Russian military boots are on Ukrainian ground.
Ukraine's overmatched border guards fled.
Ukrainian forces are capable to tackle and to cope with the Russian-led guerrillas. But this is quite difficult for us to fight with Russia and its army.
NATO has released satellite images showing Russian combat soldiers operating inside Ukraine's borders.
The satellite images released today provide additional evidence that Russian combat soldiers equipped with sophisticated heavy weaponry are operating inside Ukraine's sovereign territory.
At the White House, President Barack Obama blamed Russia directly for the escalation of violence in eastern Ukraine.
The violence is encouraged by Russia. The separatists are trained by Russia. They are armed by Russia. They are funded by Russia.
Worsening tensions evident in Kiev, where demonstrators demanded the government send reinforcements to Ukrainian forces. In the eastern city of Mariupol, thousands defied Russia to hold a pro-unity rally. And in Russia, where the families of 10 Russian soldiers captured in Ukraine pled for their safe return. Tracy Brown, Associated Press.
Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk says Russian troops are now on Ukrainian soil. The Ukrainian leader is warning that the situation in the east of the country is deteriorating rapidly.
Russia has sent a number of armored personal vehicles, tanks, and troops. We can confirm that Russian military boats are on Ukrainian ground.
This column of military vehicles was spotted near the Russian side of the border. Kiev says the latest report suggests troops are working with separatists to stage an offensive in smaller cities east of Donetsk, where fighting has been raging since April. Much of the city has become a war zone. The latest developments were enough to prompt President Petro Poroshenko to cancel a planned trip to Turkey. And in Kiev, Yatsenyuk is asking the West for more help.
We urge the EU and the United States to frozen all Russian assets until Russia pulls back its forces, its military, and stops the supply of Russian-led guerrillas.
But those guerrillas say they're digging in. Despite a death toll that exceeds 2,200, they say they'll fight to keep the territory they now hold.
Russia has invaded Ukraine. That is the unambiguous message coming from Ukraine's Interior Ministry and Ministry of Foreign Affairs amid heavy fighting in the country's east. Ukraine says regular Russian forces have crossed the border and are fighting Ukrainian soldiers. Russian tanks and columns of armored vehicles were earlier seen rolling through southeastern Ukraine. The U.S. State Department admitted that it had seen evidence of Russian regular forces operating in Ukrainian territory.
These incursions indicate a Russian-directed counteroffensive is likely underway in Donetsk and Luhansk. Clearly, that is of deep concern to us. I'll also note that we are, and I'm not sure many of you have seen this, but we're also concerned by the Russian government's unwillingness to tell the truth, even as its soldiers are found 30 miles inside Ukraine. Russia is sending its young men into Ukraine, but are not telling them where they're going or telling their parents what they're doing. We're also note reports of wounded Russian soldiers in a St. Petersburg hospital, and that other Russian soldiers are returning home to Russia for burial. These are not steps that certainly you take when you are operating in a transparent manner.
Ukraine is calling it an invasion. The country has for months reported Russian weapons moving into its territory, but the latest fighting seems to be the clearest evidence yet of direct fighting between regular Russian soldiers and Ukrainian forces. Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt also endorsed reports of fighting between Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, adding that there is a word for this. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk on Wednesday said his country had evidence that the Russian army is operating in Ukraine. There is information, which has been strongly confirmed in the last hours, that regular Russian army units operate in eastern Ukraine. This information, coming from NATO and also confirmed by our intelligence services, is rather unequivocal. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has demanded an explanation from Vladimir Putin. A spokesman for her said, reports of the presence of Russian soldiers on Ukrainian territory must be explained. Russia has not acknowledged sending regular forces into Ukraine.
My wife's my favorite, yeah. And my wife and I are more flexible.
Yeah, and I transmit this information to Vladimir and Alexander.
My wife's my favorite, yeah. And my wife and I are more flexible.
Yeah, and I transmit this information to Vladimir and Alexander.